Bugs are dying by the truckload. Yeah, finally. I know, it's kind of cruel, right? Because look at the verse. People may be pure in their own eyes, but the Lord examines their motives. So are you really thinking bugs ought to die? Oh, is that a good thing, bad thing? But are you thinking about, borrowing a pencil and not returning it? And thinking, I'm okay, everybody does it. That's probably not pure, is it? But anyway, just some food for thought. This is our sermon series at the church, starting with Proverbs 16. All right, let's open with a word of prayer. Father, thank you for a long weekend. Thank you that we're all back together. And pray for those who are still not well, that are still struggling with different illnesses or different pains or complications that just don't want to go away. Pray that they would be healed, that there will be healing through medical hands or just through the body's own process. But we ask that we would have healthy students always. Father, I pray for this week that there is something looming for every student here, and I pray that you would calm them, that you would give them peace of mind, that they know this material, and that they will do well. And Father, as we present opportunities for a little bit more tutoring, that they would take advantage of it and be prepared for this exam. Father, I thank you so much for every student here, and especially for those who love and support them. In your name we pray. Amen. Just so you know, every time I say that, I'm always thinking about my 3 kids that are in school. I do love and support them as best I can. All right. So a little bit of announcements. We are going to be doing joints today. Okay. We live in Indiana, so it's only joints of the body, not. Wow. Sorry. They're also called articulations. Would that be a better word? Anyway, that's what we're going to be talking about. And so that leaves us with bone tissue and joints as quizzes. And in lab, you know there is a lab exam. If you don't know there's a lab exam, I'm sorry. All right. So there was a study session last night. There will be another one tonight, 7 o'clock, Hartung 221. The building will be open. No need for the codes and all that jazz. Don't try your codes when the building is locked. You were taken out of the system as of 10 o'clock last night, so there you go. It's not free reign to get in this building anymore. Okay? So it'll be tonight. It'll also be tomorrow night, and it'll also be Wednesday night. So we're trying to get all y'all covered as best we can. So if you are a Thursday person, hey, that gives me 3 opportunities if you so avail yourself, okay? Did anybody go last night? Well, I know 12 people did. Was it useful? Was it helpful? Did Mav do a good job? Okay, good. All right. Now I can critique him on his work performance evaluation that I have. All right, so that's what we are asking you to do for this week in terms of lab. Today, what ought I know when we are done? Today, you ought to be able to compare and contrast the classification schemes for articulation. There are 2. We're going to talk about how joints are classified structurally and also movement. And so those are the 2 ways we're going to know about joints. We're going to talk about some examples. We're also going to talk about synovial joints. Concentrate on synovial joints. They are the most common, and they are the most complex, and they are the ones that we typically injure the most. So a little understanding about them would be a good thing. And we're going to talk about some of the movements that are possible in a synovial joint. We're going to talk about required structural components of the synovial joint, and we're going to talk about some accessories. Okay? So not every joint, not every synovial joint has accessories. And some will have all, and some will only have a few. Right? But we need to understand that these are add-ons. These are accessories. Okay? So that's where we're headed today. So when we were finished last week, we were still talking about bone tissue. So there is, of course, the lab exam material right there. You know them all, you're good to go. 206, right? Plus some of the structures on them. You should be familiar with those, or started to be. Then we talked about the bone tissue itself and how it was structured. Remember that this is an osteon. An osteon, oh, I pointed to the wrong one. That's an osteon. That is that circular column, the cylinder of bone material in lamellae around the central canal. The cell that is found in the lacunae, the little cave, is an osteocyte, which came from an osteoblast, which lays down bone material. Present in the bone is also an osteoclast, which breaks down bone. Okay, so we have the blast and the clast doing opposite things, and you need to be familiar with that. So, we then talked about bone development. We talked about two methods, intramembranous for flat bones and endochondral for long bones. And this is the example for the endochondral. It is a location at the ends of the bone between the diaphysis, the shaft, and the epiphysis, the end of the bone, the articulation portion of the bone. And there has to be cartilage there because by definition, endo means within, cartilage, so within the cartilage we are creating bone. So as long as that cartilage, which is blue up there, remains, the bone grows. And there are 5 regions that you need to be familiar with in that process. Okay? So as long as there is reserved cartilage, the bone grows. When that closes, it is epiphyseal line, and the bone is not going to grow, and that is visible on X-ray. So we also talked about hormones and the regulation of calcium in the blood. First one we talked about was calcitriol, vitamin D. And because we evidently do not get enough vitamin D because of sunlight, I don't think that's true, but especially in your age range, but we also put it in milk. Handy place to put it. Vitamin D becomes is the activated form, and you can see what it's going to do. It leads to absorption out of the digestive system. It keeps you from releasing it through your urine, and it puts it in, or breaks down your bone resorption. The net effect is to increase calcium levels in the blood. Calcitriol, increase. That's what you need to know out of that. Okay, those are the two fundamentals. The next one is calcitonin, secreted by C cells of the thyroid gland. And its net effect is to lower calcium levels in the blood. So you need to know calcitonin works opposite to calcitriol. Sorry for the names, kind of familiar. But that one is going to lower calcium levels in the blood, which means that it is depositing calcium in the bones. And then the last one was parathyroid, secreted by the parathyroid gland, and it's an increaser in calcium levels. So those are the 3, and you need to be aware of the direction of calcium levels in the blood. Are they causing an increase in calcium or a decrease? And when we say increase in calcium levels, what cell is activated? Primarily osteoclasts. And if we're saying that the calcium levels are decreasing in the blood, then it is primarily osteoblasts that are activated. Okay? Those are the essential things that you should be assigning to these hormones. Which way does the calcium level go when they are secreted, and what cell is the primary activator, clast or blast? Okay? All right, so that leads us to our topic today. We finished last week with a discussion about some pathology of the bones. It's not going to be on the exam, it was just there for kicks and giggles, as it were. All of y'all should be drinking lots of milk, right? Men and women. Get your calcium now. Store it up. Do weight-bearing exercises. Okay? Don't just swim. Get out there and run and walk and do things like that. Because eventually you are going to need the calcium that is stored. And you need to have plenty there for that day. All right, we don't want osteoporosis. No. All right, so joints for articulation. We are going to start by classifying according to movement. What does a joint do when it moves? And there are three ways that we classify it. Starting with the most movable, freely movable. We call it diarthrotic. Diarthrotic. The prefix there, di, can mean complete or through, meaning that it is completely movable, right? Or there is movement through the joint, whichever way you want to think of it. And examples are your elbow, your hip, your wrist, your ankle. Now, I'm not saying that you can move them in all directions, right? The hip, just basically, you can flex, you can extend, and you can do a little bit of that. But that's about it, right? It's not going to just fly around like your arm does, your upper extremity. It's a little different because of the structure. But we're saying it can move freely. The next one is amphiarthrotic, slightly movable. Now, if I were to pick on my biology majors, they should know what that prefix means. A-M-P-H-I. Amphi means, oh?
Human?
What?
Mammal?
No, not a mammal. A frog is a amphibian. There you go. And where does a frog live? Both in water and land. So this is a kind of a little bit of both. Slightly movable. Okay, it can move a little, but not a lot. That's kind of how I remember it. Okay, so you think intervertebral, right between the vertebrae. When you do this, you are actually pivoting at the sacral joint, right, and your hip joint. That's where you are pivoting. Your vertebrae are barely moving. They're moving a little, but not a lot. Intercarpal, right, the carpal bones. You can do that, and they move a little bit, but that's it. That's different. That's the wrist. That's between the carpal bones and the metacarpals. The carpal bones themselves just move a little, but not a lot. And then lastly, synarthrotic, because what should you not do? There you go. Shouldn't sin, therefore it doesn't move. That's how you remember that one. Synarthrotic, little to no movement. Do you want movements in your skull sutures? No. Did you have movement in your skull sutures? Yes, when you were born. Vaginally. Okay? I mean, even if you weren't born vaginally, there's still a little movement, but we definitely know there's movement between those bones if you were born vaginally. You're a coniac, remember? So there was a little bit of movement. Do your teeth move? I hope not. If they are moving, see Ashlyn in about 6 years. She will be a dentist by then. If they're still moving in 6 years, gosh, you should have seen somebody before then. Then, epiphyseal plates. What? An epiphyseal plate is a joint? Yeah. So that epiphyseal plate, where the cartilage is between the shaft of the bone, the diaphysis, and the epiphysis, the end of the bone, is a joint. Because it's not solid bone. It is a joint held together by that cartilage. Do we want movement there? Ooh, no. Okay? So those are examples. Now, just to have a little fun, I don't know why it's doing that. I thought I turned that off. I have no idea what or how somebody can do that. I mean, there's dancers in here. Can you do that? Yeah. She's not looking. Can you do that? No? All right. I mean, that is freely movable, right? Whew! But then there's joints that you shouldn't have. Oh! It's Rugby World Cup, okay? So you got to see some rugby players, just cups, okay? Go England. They beat Fiji yesterday. So yay them, all right? But no, that's not that's a new joint, and it shouldn't be there, right? And then you've got, oh, golly. I mean, this dude he should have gotten a yellow at least. I would hope he got a red. Depends upon his, no. So we can classify based on movement. Is it freely movable, diarthrotic? Is it partially movable, amphiarthrotic? Or does it not move? Synarthrotic. Okay? That's the classification based on movement. So how then can we classify it based on structure? We have 3 of those. How convenient. The first is the synovial. And a synovial joint has a joint cavity. There's a space between the bones. And it is filled with a fluid for lubrication. And it has a fibrous joint capsule. So again, shoulder, wrist, elbow, knee, hip, all the joints between your phalanges. Those are all synovial joints. Okay? And those are the requirements. A fibrous joint has collagenous fibers from one bone to another. Okay, that's all there is fibrous material. Think your pubic symphysis would be one. Or between your joints, or between your vertebrae, the intervertebral disc is another. And then cartilaginous. The cartilage holds things together with no joint capsule. Think between the rib and the sternum. Okay, that is a cartilaginous joint. Okay, that's how we can classify them based on structure. So, there's our synovial joint. Okay, you can see the ends of the bone separated by a distance, by a space. This creates the cavity, which is yellow. And there is synovial fluid found in this. Okay, and then a capsule around the whole thing. There's a fibrous, a different example, the sutures holding the bones together, fibers. And then lastly, the cartilaginous, and there's the epiphyseal plate. Okay, you can see it's a temporary cartilage joint. It should go away as the child ages, grows. So it is there between bones. Okay, so articulation is where bones come together. That hasn't been made clear. And then we describe how do they move respective to each other, and how are they held together when they come together. That's how we're classifying. Okay, so we have, again, the movement idea, di, free, amphi, partial, syn, no. What kinds of joint structures? Synovial, cartilaginous, and fibrous. So now the task is to take the two together and talk about what kind of movements are we going to have at these joints. So we're going to combine the structural with the functional. The first is the synovial joint, which are generally diarthrotic, but there are some that are amphiarthrotic, partial movement. Okay? So primarily, when you think synovial, how does it move? Say freely. Okay, that's generally, that's the big idea, but a few of them are amphiarthrotic, partial movement. Then we have the fibrous joint. That's the structure. How does it move? It is amphiarthrotic or synarthrotic. Notice we have the radius ulna, we have the tibia fibula. Between them is an interosseous ligament or interosseous membrane. So when I think about radial ulnar, between the radius and the ulnar, I can do that. There's some partial movement there. But then when I think about it in between my tibia and fibula, do those move? Oh, heavens no, they better not. Okay? So there we're describing them as synarthrotic. That's how we can classify these. And then lastly is the cartilaginous, and there's the costal cartilage between the rib and the sternum. And that is pretty much synarthrotic, but you know, when you take a really deep breath, it does move a little bit. There's a little bit of movement there. So we could say amphiarthrotic. There's our pubic symphysis. Shouldn't really move until you are in the last trimester, and there are hormones that start to loosen it, and then the bones will move a little bit. Doesn't that sound exciting? I had a student tell me, oh yeah, when she was pregnant lying on her side, she could feel them moving against each other. Now you're never going to get pregnant, right, Hannah? No way, no how. Bones are going to move? No, not for me. All right, so there is movement at some point, but normally synarthrotic. All right, so that's how we can classify based on structure and function. Structure, right? Synovial, fibrous, cartilaginous, movement, diarthrotic, amphiarthrotic, synarthrotic. Assign one of those to the structure. Okay, that's the point of discussing those. Okay? There are several of you in here that want to go on to PT school. So this is kind of important for some of you. Some of you want to be into trainers, you know, being a personal trainer. Yeah, you got to know this too, right? So there are interests here. Some of you want to be nurses. Yeah, you know, you're going to have to deal with people after they hurt something. Some of you want to be PAs or NPs down the road. And I've got stories for those in a little bit. All right, so let's talk about fibrous joints first. The sutures. Now, if you're into woodworking, those terms immediately mean something to you. If you're not into woodworking, it's all right. You gotta have a hobby. That's going to be mine when I retire. Dovetail is there, right? They are dovetailed together. They're interwoven. And then a lap joint where the bones just basically overlap each other like that. And then a butt joint where they just butt up against each other. Your mandible, your maxilla, they're butted up against each other. That's the kind of fibrous joint that you would have there. All right. Then we have something called the gomphoses. Gomphoses. One person in here needs to worry about them. Why? There's your tooth. So that's a gomphosis. That's the socket, and those are the sutures, or the fibers that are holding the tooth in place. Okay, so if you don't go to dental school, probably never going to worry about it until you have to do the tooth fairy. I don't know about you, but it stayed at $0.25 for every tooth in our house. We were not the rich kids getting $10, right, for my kids. No way. All right, then we have the syndesmoses. Syndesmoses. And by its name, you can imply what about its movement? Don't move. And there's an example of that. The tibia fibula, no movement. That's a syndesmosis. Okay? So different ways of classifying our fibrous joints. Sutures, gomphoses, the teeth into the mandible or maxilla, and syndesmosis, not very much movement. All right, so that's fibrous. What about cartilaginous? Now, remember, we have three kinds of cartilage. We have hyaline cartilage, the most common. We have elastic cartilage, primarily found in your ear and a little bit in your trachea, and then, or larynx, rather. And then we have fibrocartilage. Well, take away the elastic. That isn't going to play a role in joints, in articulations. That leaves us with hyaline and fibrocartilage. So there's really just those two cartilages involved here. So the first is a synchondrosis. Notice that chondrosis is referring to cartilage. And this is a non-movable joint, basically. And as I said, a hyaline cartilage, epiphyseal plate, no movement. We don't want to see there moving. Okay, we don't want movement there. So that's one example. The other is a symphysis. And this one, as we've noted here, pubic symphysis, or between the vertebrae, intervertebral discs. They are made of fibrocartilage and really don't move much at all, if ever, in the form of pubic symphysis. Okay, you don't want the two halves of the hip, of the pelvis, suddenly shifting. Okay, not a good idea. All right, so those are the cartilaginous joints. So what about synovial? All right, this is where we're going to spend the rest of our day, talking synovial. The joint cavity is created where the two ends of the bones meet, where the two epiphyses are coming close to each other. And an analogy, if it helps you, and this picture kind of demonstrates that, think of the bones as two baseballs stacked together, or softballs, or soccer balls, or basketballs, any round ball, okay? Just not footballs, or rugby balls, cricket balls, that works, whatever, volleyball. There they are, nice and rounded, right? There are two round bones, two round ends. And the space where they are not exactly touching becomes the joint cavity. Because it is going to be enclosed by a fibrous capsule. That's going to create the cavity. Okay, so this is the cavity surrounding the space. And the space, the cavity, is going to be filled with, go all the way to the end, synovial fluid. Okay? And the synovial fluid is going to be a secretion, a filtration of your blood. It is plasma-like, which means there should be no cells in a synovial joint. No cells. No red blood cells, no white blood cells, and certainly no bacteria or other types of organisms like that. Should be nothing there but the fluid. And the fluid is lubricating, okay? Because on the ends of the bone is articular cartilage. All right, so we know that epiphyses have a covering of articular cartilage. And to help them smoothly move, we're going to have synovial fluid as a lubricant for the whole setup. And that fluid, as I said, is a secretion or filtration product of blood that is going to be controlled by the synovial membrane. And the synovial membrane is rich in blood supply. So if you were to damage a joint, extensively damaged, there could be blood in that joint cavity because you've torn the synovial membrane. That's a big uh-oh, because there should be no cells in there. Okay? I know, it's warm down here too. Sorry about that. We go from 0 to 60 in a weekend. All right. So that's the requirements for a synovial joint. Joint cavity, a fibrous capsule, articular cartilage, synovial membrane, synovial fluid. So I hope you're processing, thinking ahead, and saying, well, what if there's little fluid? What's that going to do to the joint? If you didn't have the right amount of synovial fluid in there, what happens to the joint? Will it move as freely? No. Will it be a little grind on it? Yeah. What if there's too much synovial fluid? Will it move smoothly and easily? Probably not, because you've swollen the joint, right? The capsule is increased tension. Will you be able to move it as easily? We've all jammed fingers or done other things, and your finger doesn't do that as well as it should because there's an excess fluid there. Okay? what happens if there is the two bones touching each other because the articular cartilage is going away? Will that move as freely? Oh no. Will you hear it? Oh yeah. Will you feel it? Yeah. Okay, we'll get more into that in a second. All right, so there's another picture. That's an interphalangeal joint. Or, sorry, no, it's interphalangeal. I had to count my bones. Interphalangeal joint. So there's the capsule again. There's the synovial membrane. There's the cavity filled with synovial fluid. There's the articular cartilage. Everything's present in that little joint. Okay? But some joints have add-ons, accessories. Okay? They have things that not all joints have. And so these accessories include things like a meniscus. All right, the lateral meniscus here between the femur and the tibia. And that is fibrocartilage. It is a ring, or a partial ring, of fibrocartilage designed, as noted, to create a little shock absorption, as well as guiding the bone movement. Because what should your hip knee do? What is it only designed to do? Right? It's only designed to flex and extend. That's it. We don't want it moving laterally or medially. We don't want it moving anterior, posterior. That's not good. So the meniscus is designed to help it. Now, do not think the knee is the only place with meniscus. TMJ, temporomandibular joint, also has a meniscus. And some of you maybe have felt when it kind of slides just a little out, and you kind of hear that, oh, painful pop. Okay? So they are there in the temporomandibular joint as well. Then there are tendons and ligaments. Tendons are attaching what to what? Muscle to bone. And ligaments are attaching what to what? Bone to bone. Okay? They are found outside of the joint capsule and inside of the joint capsule. So our patellar ligament that's pictured here, it is a ligament. It is not a tendon when it goes from the patella to the tibial tuberosity. It's bone on bone, bone to bone. Don't be confused. All right? Don't let your athletic trainer tell you it's a patellar tendon. It's a ligament. Okay? There's no AP students in here anymore, so I used to have that big debate all the time. But that one is outside of the joint capsule. So it is extracapsular. There are some that are inside of the joint capsule. This one is not picturing that. The quadriceps femoris tendon is not inside either. But there are some that are present within the capsule. And then we have the bursa and tendon sheaths. This is an extra synovial membrane. So it creates an extra sac that is filled with fluid. These are more than the synovial membrane inside the cavity. It is outside of the cavity and is an additional sac. And you can see there are a ton of them in the knee. I'm only pointing out a couple. The subcutaneous prepatellar bursa, right there. You know, when you hit your knee and it swells up in the front, you get a knot on there, that's what's swelling. Okay, or if you get swelling below the patella, it's one of these, the infrapatellar bursas. And we talked about in the humerus, there is the intertubercle groove with bicep brachii tendon sliding in it. Okay, and it's sliding inside of a tendon sheath. So it's wrapped by a synovial-filled sheath. And so this is, of course, your wrist and your fingers, but it's the same idea up in the shoulder. So you can see there is quite a bit of this synovial fluid around these tendons, and it's aiding them in their movements. When you think of all the activities that you do at the wrist and fingers, that's a great idea. I mean, they're probably your most used synovial joints throughout the day. Probably using those more than most of the others. Okay? So, those are extras, as well as the meniscus and where the ligaments and tendons are. Are they inside or outside of the capsule? All right. There's the knee, and there's some more ligaments that are intercapsular. So these cruciate ligaments, both anterior and posterior, are contained inside of the capsule. But then we see that there are fibular and tibial. Those are outside of the capsule, for instance. Okay? So that's the difference when we look at this. And then this would, of course, be the cavity filled with fluid. Cavity filled with fluid over here. They just don't have the synovial capsule picture. And there's the posterior view of the knee. Okay? You can see again articular cartilages. You can see the meniscus, both medial and lateral. Those are those cushioning pads. Keep the guide going. Sorry. Then we have the back up. There's the lateral view of the or sagittal section rather of the knee as well. Different view of the same. All right. There's the meniscus, semicircular. Okay, keeps the head or the condyles of the femur in place. All right. So then, what has become my favorite joint of the week and the month? You've noticed I've been hobbling around a little bit. If you haven't noticed, that's okay. All right. So. About a month ago, I suddenly was feeling pain in my hip joint. Okay, it was starting to be painful. And I was starting to feel a little lack of range of motion. So when I sit down every morning and I put on my socks, I've got no problem. Right? I can cross my leg. No big deal. Right leg, full sock on, put the shoe on. No big deal. Then I try to do it over here without any pain. And I get to the point where I cannot barely reach my foot. So I'm losing range of motion in my leg. You like my socks? Yeah, I try every day. So I'm losing range of motion in my left hip. So when I stand up, it's painful. Okay? A little bit of inflammation going on there. You can feel my greater trochanter, and when you walk, if you were to feel me walking, you would feel it grinding a little bit. And I went to a PA Friday. I'd already seen a nurse practitioner, my regular practitioner, and she diagnosed the same thing. But the PA works in an orthopedic office. And they took an x-ray. I saw the x-ray. It didn't look like that. Okay? Instead, it looked like that. I mean, they had the x-ray pulled up before she came in, and I took a look at it. I'm like, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt what's going on. So in this one, notice how there is a nice capsule, a nice space between the head of the femur and the acetabulum. Then you look over here, and there's a space. There's no space there. And that's exactly what's happening to my knee. The articular surfaces have to be nice and smooth, and there has to be a nice gap for them to move. And based on the shape of the epiphysis will dictate what kind of movement you're going to have. So in this case, it's a ball and socket, same as your shoulder. So there ought to be lots of movement. No, that hurts. So, that hurts too. So there's pain and a restriction of movement because the articular surfaces are changing shape. I have bone spurs on my head of my femur. I have this enlargement of the acetabulum. And so suddenly, a month ago, it just caught. And now it won't free itself because there's too much bone in there. And she tried to manipulate. She said, "You're as tense as anything. There's no movement there." PT? Nope, not going to do anything. So guess what I'm going to have done? So I see an orthopod in a month. We'll schedule a surgery. There's nothing else I can do except live with it. And I don't want to live with it. Still got landscaping to do at this point. Yes?
What do you do to prevent stuff like that from happening?
Well, in my case, my grandmother on my mom's side had both hips done. My mom's had both hips done, and one of her brothers has had a hip done. Is there anything I could do to prevent it? Yeah, oh yeah, there's a genetic component for sure. But obviously less stress, right? Played football, used to get clips, blocks on the side from this one player. He was notorious for it, and he was on our team, and he would hit me there all the time. So that probably didn't help. Yeah, you know, and runners, pound, 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 pound. Dancers, pound, 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 pound. Okay, basketball, volleyball, jump, smack. All of those things are going to put a wear on to the joint, regardless of what joint. Okay, trying to do the splits to block a ball. Who would do that? Okay, so. You know, and then of course we can talk about our field, which is brand new artificial turf. Is that better or worse for joints? It's worse. Should have been left in natural grass. It's softer and better. Plus, it's a blast to play in when it's muddy and snowy. I mean, really, you know, you gain extra yardage just by sliding across the snow. What? You like that? All right. So that's one limitation on the range of motion. The other is the ligaments and the tendons in the joint capsule. Okay? So I don't have much movement here because of the articular surfaces, but now what have my ligaments done? They're starting to become tense, right? I could get the dancers up here and they could show you how their ligaments are really stretched and pliable, right? You could do that. Maybe I'll make you do that Wednesday. Okay? So that's going to limit. Are they flexible? Are they too short? Are they too long? Are they torn? Are they not torn? And then lastly, what is the action of the muscles? Right? This is a flexion extension joint. So guess what the muscles are designed to do? Flex and extend. That's it. I don't have other muscles at the elbow to do anything other than flexion, extension. All that is designed there. Shoulder, different. Right? What do I get to do with my shoulder? I can raise it up. I can push it down. I can abduct my arm. I can adduct my upper extremity. I can rotate it. All because I have different muscles to do different things. Okay. So, last thing today. How do we classify the synovial joints? Now, if you look over here and you have a mechanical mind, you look at those and go, ball and socket. Okay? Literally, a ball in a socket. And guess what the replacement looks like? That and a socket. Okay? Made of titanium. Woo! And then, that hip and the shoulder are two examples. The hinge joint. Okay? The hinge joint. Like the door hinge. That's all it does. So elbow or knee. A saddle joint. Now that looks a little weird down here. So that's a saddle. The portion of the bone is nestled in kind of a curved area. And remember, primates, that's it. That's the only ones that have a saddle joint. Your dog and your cat. have a thumb, but they can't do this. Okay? So that's an extra special joint, the saddle joint. Okay, there's the fancy word, trapeziometacarpal. And then a pivot joint, so between C1 and C2. All right, so cervical vertebrae 1, cervical vertebrae number 2. That's what you were doing when you were 2. No. Okay? That's what moves when you say no, is between C1 and C2. You want to say yes, that's between your condyles of the occipital bone and C1. And then we have the gliding ones, carpals, the tarsals, intervertebrals. So you all hopefully also recognize that I've gone from very freely movable, diarthrotic, still a bit diarthrotic, to getting a little less freely moving, kind of not much movement, to, well, really almost no movement at all. So based on structure of the articular surfaces, you can see how much range of motion you get. Just on the principle of how the bones are touching. Okay? And then condyloid radiocarpal, and that's where we can stop. Okay? So, I know it took a few more minutes. I always like to try and finish a little early this week. Sorry, but I don't have a lab today at 2. So on Wednesday, I will finish a little early so that the Wednesday people who do come to class, the Wednesday people don't always